Part 1. The first keynote centers on the moment the single dad stepped into the wrong elevator, a mistake that seemed small but carried the full weight of his circumstances. He had arrived at the building long before sunset, signed in quietly, and collected his cleaning supplies without drawing attention. This job was not his first choice, nor was it meant to be permanent, but it paid just enough to keep life moving forward. Every shift mattered. Every hour translated into groceries, school fees, and a fragile sense of stability for his child. Fatigue had become his constant companion, dulling the sharpness of his awareness. That evening, his mind was elsewhere, split between the tasks ahead and a message he had just received about an upcoming school payment he was not sure how to meet. The elevator lobby was nearly empty, the polished floors reflecting harsh white light. He saw doors opening and stepped inside without looking closely, grateful for the brief rest elevators offered to tired legs. Only after the doors closed did he notice the silence felt different, smoother, insulated in a way lower floors never were. As the numbers climbed higher than usual, a knot formed in his stomach. He realized too late that this elevator did not serve the maintenance floors. It was reserved for executives, protected by unspoken rules and subtle barriers that rarely needed enforcement because people like him instinctively avoided crossing them. His first instinct was to press a lower floor button, but the elevator was already slowing. The doors opened onto a space that felt almost unreal compared to the rest of the building. Soft carpeting absorbed sound, glass walls revealed carefully lit offices, and everything carried an air of control and importance. He froze for a second, weighing his options. Staying inside risked drawing attention. Stepping out risked the same. He chose movement, believing that purpose, even when mistaken, looked less suspicious than hesitation. As he walked, he kept his head slightly lowered, scanning for stairs or a service corridor. He had learned long ago that in spaces not meant for him, the safest approach was invisibility. Blend in, move quickly, apologize if necessary, and leave no trace. Yet the contrast between his worn uniform and the immaculate surroundings made invisibility impossible. Every step echoed his awareness that he did not belong there, not by design, but by assumption. This keynote highlights more than a simple navigation error. It exposes how rigidly spaces are divided, not just by access cards and signs, but by social expectation. The wrong elevator did not simply take him to another floor. It placed him in a world where his presence was immediately suspect. He knew that if confronted, he would be required to explain himself, to justify why he existed in that space at all. That burden of explanation was familiar. He had carried it in offices, hospitals, and schools, places where his role as a single father and a low-wage worker prompted questions others were never asked. As he walked, memories surfaced of other moments when a small mistake had been magnified by perception. A misform. A misunderstood instruction. Each time, the consequences felt heavier because there was no cushion to absorb them. Wealth and status forgive errors. Poverty does not. He understood that deeply. That understanding shaped how carefully he moved through the world, always alert, always compensating. His phone vibrated in his pocket, another reminder of the life waiting outside these glass walls. He ignored it, focusing instead on finding an exit before anyone noticed him. But attention had already found him. Not because he caused disruption, but because difference stands out in places built on sameness. The building was designed to separate functions, but it was also designed to filter people. And he had slipped through a crack that was never meant to be tested. The anxiety he felt was not fear of punishment alone. It was the fear of humiliation. Being escorted out, questioned publicly, reduced to an inconvenience. He thought of his child and how easily one incident could ripple outward, costing him this job, this income, this fragile balance. All because of an elevator button pressed without thought. The injustice of that possibility burned quietly, but he pushed it down. Emotion had never helped him in moments like this. This first keynote emphasizes how vulnerability operates in everyday settings. The single dad was not reckless or careless by nature. He was exhausted. He was human. Yet the margin for error afforded to him was razor thin. The wrong elevator became a symbol of how easily people at the bottom can be punished for mistakes that others would barely notice. It also revealed how much emotional labor goes into simply existing under scrutiny, how much calculation precedes even the simplest action. As he finally spotted a hallway that might lead to stairs, relief flickered briefly. He adjusted his grip on his supplies, ready to disappear back into the background where he felt safest. He did not yet know that this mistake would not end in removal or reprimand. He could not have known that someone on that floor carried a memory of him, one powerful enough to halt the usual response. In his mind, this was just another obstacle to navigate quietly, another test of patience and restraint. The wrong elevator was the catalyst, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. Ordinary mistakes are the ones that reveal the most about systems and the people within them. For the single dad, this moment crystallized a lifetime of navigating spaces not built with him in mind. He stood there, determined to exit without causing trouble, unaware that the very presence he feared would soon force a reckoning far beyond that floor. Part 2. The second keynote unfolds at the instant of recognition, when the billionaire CEO's gaze meets the single dad's face and time seems to collapse inward. From her position near the conference room, she had intended to address a simple breach of protocol. An unfamiliar worker on the executive floor was usually handled swiftly, delegated to security without much thought. Yet the moment her eyes focused on him, the routine response dissolved. What she saw was not a uniform or a badge, but a face imprinted with memory, one she had not seen in years but had never truly forgotten. Recognition did not arrive gently. It struck her with the force of a held breath finally released. The features were older now, marked by fatigue and loss, but unmistakable. The same eyes that once watched over her family in a time of chaos now scanned the floor nervously, searching for an exit. In that instant, the polished surroundings faded. She was no longer a CEO in a glass tower. She was transported back to a period of vulnerability, when money and influence had been useless, and help had come from someone who asked for nothing in return. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. The pause was visible, unsettling to those around her. The authority she usually carried so effortlessly faltered, replaced by something raw and deeply human. Her mind replayed fragments of the past. A night when fear had overwhelmed her household. A stranger who stepped forward when others turned away. A man who offered stability, protection, and quiet competence without expectation. That man stood before her now, diminished by circumstance in the eyes of the world, yet unchanged in essence. The single dad sensed the shift immediately. He was accustomed to reading faces for signs of trouble, and this was different from suspicion. There was surprise, even shock, in her expression. He apologized again, his voice respectful, explaining the elevator mistake and assuring her he would leave at once. His words were automatic, shaped by habit rather than emotion. He did not recognize her yet. To him, she was another executive whose space he had accidentally invaded, someone with the power to decide his immediate fate. This keynote reveals how recognition can disrupt entrenched power dynamics. In most settings, a billionaire CEO and a low-wage worker exist worlds apart. Their interaction is governed by hierarchy and distance. But memory collapses those structures. When the CEO recognized him, the balance shifted not because she chose to elevate him, but because she could no longer deny their shared history. The authority of her position was suddenly challenged by the authority of lived experience. She struggled briefly to reconcile the man she remembered with the man before her. The past version stood tall in her memory, steady and capable, someone she had associated with safety. The present version looked tired, careful, guarded. That contrast sparked a wave of emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. Guilt surfaced, not personal guilt, but a broader awareness of how unevenly life rewards goodness. She had risen, multiplied her wealth, and gained influence. He had fallen into obscurity, carrying burdens invisible to those who passed him daily. The recognition also forced her to confront her own assumptions. She had walked into countless rooms confident that success reflected merit. Yet here stood someone whose merit she knew intimately, reduced to invisibility by circumstance. The truth unsettled her more than any market volatility ever had. It challenged the comforting narrative that hard work alone determined outcomes. As she met his eyes fully, she saw the same restraint she remembered. He did not argue. He did not defend himself aggressively. He waited, prepared to accept whatever decision came. That composure, once a source of reassurance for her family, now appeared as quiet endurance. The realization tightened her throat. She understood then that recognition carried responsibility. To see someone truly meant being unable to look away. This second keynote emphasizes the power of memory to cut through social roles. The CEO did not gasp because he was out of place. She gasped because he belonged to her past in a way that transcended wealth and status. That gasp was not theatrical. It was the involuntary response of someone confronted with an unresolved truth. The man she owed gratitude to stood before her, asking only to be allowed to leave without trouble. In the silence that followed, decisions formed quickly. Not out of charity, but out of clarity. She knew that whatever happened next would matter, not just to him, but to her understanding of herself. Ignoring him, allowing security to remove him, would preserve protocol but violate integrity. Acknowledging him openly would disrupt the polished order she commanded daily, but it would honor the truths she now faced. For the single dad, this moment passed in confusion. He did not yet understand why she stared, why her expression shifted from authority to shock. He only knew that something unexpected was unfolding, something that did not fit the patterns he had learned to anticipate. He waited, holding his breath internally, bracing for consequences he believed he deserved for a simple mistake. The second keynote rests in that fragile pause, where recognition transforms a situation before words are spoken. It shows how identity is not fixed by clothing or role, but by the connections that survive time and circumstance. In recognizing him, the CEO reclaimed a piece of her own history, one she could no longer ignore. And in that recognition, the story pivoted, moving away from exclusion toward reckoning, setting the stage for everything that would follow. Part 3. The third keynote unfolds in the private reckoning that follows recognition, when shock gives way to choice and power is tested not by authority, but by conscience. After the CEO's gasp, the air between them thickened with unspoken history. People nearby sensed something unusual and paused, unsure whether to intervene. The single dad stood still, eyes lowered out of habit, ready to accept removal if that was what came next. He had learned that lingering invited trouble. But instead of calling security, the CEO raised a hand slightly, a subtle signal that halted the automatic response. She asked everyone to give them a moment, her voice controlled but softer than usual. The floor cleared without explanation, leaving a silence that felt both protective and exposed. She invited him to walk with her, not as a command but as a request. He hesitated, confused, then followed, carrying his supplies like a shield. As they moved through the executive corridor, the contrast between their worlds pressed in on him. He wondered what he had done wrong beyond pressing the wrong button. He wondered if this conversation would cost him his job. He wondered how quickly rumors traveled in buildings like this. The CEO, walking beside him, felt a different weight. She was acutely aware of how every step could either restore dignity or compound harm. In her office, she closed the door and asked him to sit. He declined politely, preferring to stand, the posture of someone accustomed to being brief and deferential. She noticed and felt a pang of regret she could not easily name. She began by acknowledging the elevator mistake and apologizing for the confusion. The apology was simple, unadorned, and sincere. It disarmed him more than any reprimand would have. He nodded, murmuring that it was his fault, that he would be more careful. The reflex to accept blame surfaced automatically, even when it was unnecessary. She then asked about his life, not prying, but open-ended. At first, he answered minimally cautious. He spoke of cleaning shifts, of raising his child alone, of keeping things steady. He avoided complaint. Over time, her questions signaled genuine interest rather than assessment, and his guard lowered. He shared the loss of his wife, the recalibration of priorities, the years spent choosing reliability over advancement. He spoke without self-pity, framing his choices as necessary rather than noble. The steadiness of his tone revealed a practiced resilience. The CEO listened without interruption. As he spoke, she felt the full scope of the disparity between their paths settle into focus. She had often credited grit and vision for her success. Hearing him describe sacrifices that never translated into recognition unsettled that belief. She realized that merit did not operate on a fair timetable, and that survival often consumed the energy that ambition required. The room held a truth she could not unsee: goodness had not protected him from struggle, and success had not exempted her from responsibility. She acknowledged their past connection, naming it gently, careful not to embarrass him. His eyes lifted then, recognition dawning slowly. He remembered her family, the night he had helped, the reason he had walked away without expecting anything in return. The memory stirred emotion he had long compartmentalized. He nodded, confirming it without dramatization. The exchange grounded them in a shared reality that transcended roles. In that moment, hierarchy receded, replaced by mutual recognition. This keynote is about the choice to restore dignity through privacy rather than spectacle. The CEO did not announce his worth to the floor or stage a public reversal. She created a protected space where truth could be spoken without performance. That decision mattered. It allowed him to remain whole, not elevated as a symbol, not reduced to a lesson. He was treated as a person, not a narrative. She asked what he needed. The question was careful, avoiding assumption. He paused, surprised by its sincerity. He did not ask for favors. He asked only to keep his job and to avoid trouble. The simplicity of the request cut deeply. It revealed how narrow his expectations had become, shaped by years of negotiating risk. She assured him that his job was safe and that the elevator incident would not follow him. She then offered something more measured than rescue: opportunity aligned with choice. Information about roles, training, and flexibility, presented without pressure. He took time to consider, explaining his boundaries clearly. His child came first. Stability mattered more than title. She accepted this without argument, recognizing wisdom where others might see limitation. They discussed paths that respected his constraints and valued his experience. The conversation shifted from correction to collaboration, not hurried, not transactional. The third keynote underscores that real change often happens away from witnesses. It is built in conversations where listening replaces judgment, and where power yields space. The CEO's authority did not diminish when she chose empathy. It deepened. The single dad's dignity did not depend on her acknowledgement, but her acknowledgement prevented further erosion. As the meeting ended, she walked him back to the service corridor herself, ensuring he could exit without attention. The gesture was deliberate. It signaled respect without spectacle. Before parting, she thanked him, not for the past alone, but for the steadiness he continued to carry. He accepted with a nod, not seeking affirmation, but receiving it nonetheless. In the quiet after he left, the CEO remained seated, absorbing the implications. Systems rewarded visibility, yet integrity often moved unseen. She resolved to examine the spaces between floors, the gaps where people slipped through unnoticed. For the single dad, returning to his work, something subtle had shifted. He moved with the same humility, but with a renewed sense that being seen did not have to cost him his balance. This keynote closes on a truth that lingers: dignity is preserved not by grand gestures, but by careful choices made when no one is watching. Recognition, when paired with restraint, can heal without wounding. And in that private reckoning, both lives bent toward a more honest alignment, setting the stage for outcomes shaped not by chance, but by conscience. Part 4: The fourth keynote emerges in the aftermath, where intentions are tested by sustained action and the quiet promises made in private must survive the routines of public life. In the days following their conversation, nothing outwardly dramatic changed for the single dad. His schedule remained early and long, his tasks familiar, his focus steady. Yet beneath the surface, small shifts began to signal that the encounter had not been a momentary kindness but the start of structural attention. Notices appeared about optional training sessions scheduled around caregiving hours. Supervisors communicated more clearly, not as a special accommodation for one person, but as a recalibration that benefited many who had learned to work around inflexible systems. The single dad approached these changes with caution. Experience had taught him that hope could be costly if it ran ahead of reality. He attended one session, then another, careful not to overcommit. He asked practical questions, not about advancement, but about continuity and expectations. The answers were consistent, and that consistency mattered. It suggested that the organization was learning to translate empathy into process. He felt no pressure to perform gratitude, no demand to become a success story. His work was evaluated by the same standards as before, but with clearer pathways and fewer hidden penalties. For the CEO, the work deepened rather than concluded. She began to audit the invisible ladders within the company, identifying where access depended on informal sponsorship or unspoken norms. The elevator incident had revealed how easily people could be sorted by proximity rather than potential. She convened small cross-functional groups, not to announce a reform agenda, but to listen. Patterns emerged. Caregivers avoided opportunities that required sudden travel. Night shift workers missed trainings scheduled during the day. Contract staff performed essential tasks without voice or visibility. None of this was new information, yet seeing it mapped with human stories gave it urgency. She resisted the urge to personalize the solution. The single dad did not become the face of change. Instead, his constraints informed broader adjustments. Flexibility became a design principle rather than an exception. Communication about roles and development was made explicit. Feedback loops were formalized so that quiet contributors were not overlooked. These changes required patience and persistence. They did not generate headlines, but they reduced friction where it had been normalized as inevitability. The single dad noticed the difference in how conversations unfolded. Managers asked rather than assumed. Schedules were negotiated rather than imposed. When he declined a role that conflicted with his child's needs, the refusal did not mark him as unambitious. It was recorded as a preference, respected without penalty. Over time, he accepted a responsibility that aligned with his strengths and boundaries. It was not a leap, but a step, chosen deliberately. The stability he valued remained intact, now paired with recognition that did not demand sacrifice beyond his means. Trust built slowly. Each kept commitment reinforced it. When mistakes occurred, they were addressed without humiliation. When successes happened, they were acknowledged without spectacle. The organization learned that reliability, often mistaken for passivity, was a cornerstone of resilience. The single dad's presence influenced team culture in subtle ways. He modeled preparation, calm under pressure, and an ethic of care that extended beyond task completion. Colleagues sought his input, not because of a story attached to him, but because of the steadiness he brought. The CEO continued to reflect on power exercised quietly. She learned that dignity is sustained by predictability as much as by kindness. People needed to know that respect would not be revoked under stress. She embedded this understanding into leadership training, emphasizing that the measure of authority was not decisiveness alone, but the capacity to widen participation without losing clarity. Leaders were encouraged to ask who was absent from the room and why, and to treat those answers as design challenges rather than personal failings. As months passed, the single dad's life did not transform into ease, but it became less precarious. The margin he gained was time. Time to help with homework without anxiety. Time to plan rather than react. Time to consider growth without fear of collapse. These gains were modest and profound. They did not erase loss, but they honored endurance. He remained cautious, grounded, unwilling to gamble stability for promise. The system, now more transparent, allowed that choice without consequence. The fourth keynote is about durability. It asks whether care can persist beyond the moment of recognition, whether systems can be tuned to human reality without losing effectiveness. In this story, the answer is incremental but affirmative. Change did not arrive as a rescue. It arrived as alignment. The CEO's role shifted from benefactor to steward. The single dad's role expanded from survivor to contributor, without forcing a narrative he did not choose. The elevator that once symbolized separation became ordinary again, its buttons pressed without incident. The memory of that gasp receded, replaced by routines that carried less risk. Yet the lesson endured. People are more than the floors they occupy. Opportunity grows when pathways are designed with care. Dignity, once restored, must be maintained through habit. In the end, there was no public reveal, no applause. There was continuity. Work done well, lives balanced as best they could be, leadership exercised with restraint. The fourth keynote closes on this truth. The most meaningful outcomes are often quiet, built through consistency and respect. When empathy becomes infrastructure, It outlasts chance encounters and reshapes what success can look like for those who have learned to endure without being seen.